Record. Right. Okay. For those that want to know, this is being recorded. For those that don't want to know, it's tough. Okay. So Ghost Experience Cymru has been undertaking walks all the way through from the Plough and Harrow for the past 5 years, actually. So 5 years we've been doing Monknash. And one thing that must be said is very much something that I've had a conversation with John about, who's with us tonight, is about the issue, are these ghost myths, legends, archaeology and history just about ghosts? And to be honest with you, the answer is this one, there's a lot of archaeology and history in it as well. And the point of doing this part 2 is that there's a lot more I want to cram into it, and I just don't want to rush it tonight. When I originally met Michelle in 2015, wonderful things started to happen and we got together. And one thing that Michelle said to me in about May, June time was, how about organizing a ghost walk of the Monknash landscape? And the first thing I said inside was certainly not, because obviously deeply in love with her, I'll do anything for her. I said, okay, we'll have a ghost walk there. But then I sat down, I said, hang on a minute, I want a ghost walk and I want an archaeology and history walk. So that's what we did. So every time that I started to think about this, I thought, I really don't want to do ghost stories. I don't believe in ghosts. I have never seen a ghost. I have no idea what these things are about. This is 5 years on. I thoroughly believe in ghosts, and I've seen more than one in my time doing ghost walks throughout the area, and 1 or 2 I've actually sensed and experienced within this landscape in front of you. So that's very important. We always started at the Plough and Harrow, and if any of you ever visited the Plough and Harrow in 2015, there was a landlady there and called Paula, and we got on very well with Paula. And the one thing about Paula is she really wanted us to do these walks, but I thought, okay, let's do these walks. We had a fair bit of support off her, and the first walk, paraphrasing this, the first walk that we held started at 7 o'clock, didn't finish until gone past 10. It was supposed to be a 2-hour walk. It went on by over an hour. So it went on to about 20 minutes past 10. So it really was a long walk. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to convince everybody that the history and archaeology was going to carry the story in that evening for 3 hours. So I did the history and archaeology of the Plough and Harrow. We wandered all the way up through the Green Lane. This is called the Green Lane, nearly all the way to the turning for Brufton. And we went all the way down here. That strange thing there is the Dovecote Tithe Barn. We show a few of these in the images. We went all the way down through the valley, taking about 10 people with us. By the time we got to the Nash Brook, I was telling ghost stories. I could tell nothing but ghost stories, and things started to get very creepy. One thing I really feel is that if I'm going to do this any justice tonight, I need to read from my own book, Ghosts of Glamorgan, and I really need to try to tell what I've got from my own words, and then we can probably re-associate ourselves with some of the things I've said, and that would be a good way of doing it. But before we actually do that, we just need to zoom out. So this is inland by the Plough and Harrow, St. Mary's Church, which we never ever visited. This here is the monastic landscape. You can see my cursor. And down here is the Nash Brook and Firefunnan. And we've got, it's otherwise known as Blaenacwm. It's got 3 or 4 names for it, actually. This little bit of the valley, it's very spooky and it's a very odd landscape. And to be honest with you, I'm dying to tell you so many things tonight, but I'm not going to be able to tell you them all. So this is what you don't see on the ground. But to give you an idea, this triangle is very interesting to me. It's very powerful, this triangle. Talk about that in a moment. That there is the dovecote, which we'll see an image of. This here is where all the fish ponds are, if you can follow my cursor. And over here, that's where the plough and harrow is, and over there is the tithe barn. And you know what? Playing around with this technology, I've actually found that you can actually use little tools. So if I do this, over here, that there is the plough and harrow. This here is something that we're going to talk about in a moment. That there is the dovecote, the columbarium. This here is the tithe barn, and the tithe barn itself, back in the medieval period, back in about 1400s, was the tallest building anywhere on the landscape. It was a really tall, lofty building. Here, all this area here is the area of the fish ponds. There's a rather interesting barn here that's seen lots of changes. Another interesting monastic building here. Over here, this is where the monks would have stayed. It's called a grange, but if this building comes into fruition, this is where there's a chapel. Not many people know that. And amazingly enough, I know John wants to ask this, has this landscape ever been excavated? Never. It's never been excavated. But what we do know is if we go to here, when you go, to give you an idea, when you drive down this road and you turn right to the plough and harrow, there's this triangle of grass and trees in front of you. When you come down from Langford Major and then you turn left to the plough and harrow, there's this triangle of trees. I stand in this triangle of trees and I look northwards into this area here. And this is rather interesting for me as an archaeologist. And the reason why it's rather interesting is about 50 years ago, you could see burial mounds here, Iron Age burial mounds. And then it puts up the hairs on the back of your neck. And the reason why me saying that puts up hairs on the back of your neck is because here is also a burial ground. This burial ground here is actually a burial ground associated with the Black Death, the Great Plague, Eurestis pestis, the plague that hit the area in 1349. And when you want to associate this landscape with burial, this building here, the Plough and Harrow, is a building that's said to be a building that the dead were prepared. They were brought up from the coast by the monks who had been actively involved in shipwrecking. When I read from my book, one of the things that I do say is that about these evil monks, very evil, horrible monks, they were involved in shipwrecking, taking people's lives away. And yet, if you've ever heard of the Wiccas of Wreck, these are the Wicca monks. What the hell was that?
I jumped a mile.
Yeah, and me. Yeah, that was one of the.
Sorry, that was my dog. I'm sorry.
That was one of the sound effects. Yeah, that was really good. I don't even know what I was talking about then, but one of the things here is that one of the key issues is that this road here, if we want to change the font, this here is the boundary of monastic land, and up here is sort of the Wick side, Brufton side. That's secular land. This here is ecclesiastical land. This is the land of the church. So to actually get to the coast and wreck ships, you would have needed permission from these people who were actively involved in the wrecking. So these were murderous monks. So a little bit more about that coming up. So here we go. If I can, hang on, if we can re-annotate that. Just getting used to this technology a second. And oh, beep. And we're going to clear all the drawings. Not that impressive, but I know it would impress some of you. So clear and go back to mouse. Thank you very much. So again, the sea's very close. All monastic land. Monastic land actually over here Over here, I'm not going to draw on this because it's taken up a little bit of time. Over here is Marcross, which is also monastic land. So in other words, this entire landscape here is all church land. It was some of the richest agricultural land anywhere in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's still producing produce, and it's for cattle rearing and all the rest of it today. It's still a very, very rich landscape. Very haunted landscape. Get on with it, Carl. Let's have a few ghost stories. And here is where we're going to go. This is where we're going to go. And I've got to be reminded that I've got to tell you the story of Sean Kelwith. And if I do not tell you the story of Sean Kelwith, Amy is allowed to remind me that I've not done his story. So this itself, and I will ask you a question in a minute, Amy, so don't butt in. This, as you go down the road here, so I'm going to show you where we are. This here is, I'll bring actually the drawing thing on again to annotate this again. Let's just sort of a bit more drawing. So this here is where we're going to go now. And obviously this is obviously all the Grange area. And usually to actually get to where we're going, what you would do is if you ever come on a ghost walk with me, we sort of walk all the way down here. We walk all the way down this road. I tell lots of stories. I usually do a runner. I usually hide in a tree down here, and this is where the fun begins. And before we talk about where the fun begins, I'm going to bring in Amy a second. So, Amy, just give everybody, not to take away my glory this evening, how do you feel when you go to this part of the landscape?
Thinking of this now, I've got goosebumps right now, and like for some reason I'm feeling really teary and upset.
And actually, teary and upset is a very interesting feeling, because I was talking to my my daughter on Skype today, my little Carrie Ann, and she said, I said to her, I'm doing Monknash tonight, and she said, is that the place that you took me 4 years ago on a ghost walk? You could tell the priorities as a parent. I've got to take my children to work with me. But she went on a ghost walk with us, and over at the top here, overlooking the mill, Blaenacombe Mill, she was one of those children that day, 4 years ago, that she felt that something was passing through her, some of the children of the wood. And to call it intuition, my intuition guided me to understanding this woodland. And if we do manage to get through half of what I want to do today, it will transpire more. So let's do a little bit of a reading. The landscape of the Cistercian Grange of Monknash has a small number of ghost stories associated with it, including the one about Sean Kelwith. The landscape heads from the Plough and Harrow pub, Monknash, to the coast known as Cymru, west of Llantwit Major, Vale of Glamorgan. But from the Plough and Harrow at Monknash, the landscape has a genuinely evil tone about it. It should be noted that many a landlord at the Plough and Harrow has, to say the least, become a little unhinged by their residency there. What is lacking from the interwoven history of Monknash is a written down chapter of ghost stories about the valley of Blaenacombe. And there you're looking into it, my folks, and also behind me as well. We aim to address that here. Blaenacombe is the stretch of public footpath that continues from the open public road and that leads towards a dead end in the form of the actual coastline. This stretch is also known as Burial Lane. At the top of this juncture, there is also a private road that leads slightly west towards a house. The Cwm, until you are upon it, is almost mythical, a hidden gorge in a matter of words, and it plays well into the storytelling of Cymru tradition with the likes of Merlin and his kin. Blaenacombe can be experienced as 3 sections, and genuinely frightening upper and middle. So I think what I might need to do is actually, as I'm trying to multitask, hopefully, if I can bring in to explain where we're talking about, let's annotate this on the map. So if any of you go down there, so in 3 sections, so you've got the upper, and the upper part contains the mill, leat, and mill, and at times a rocky pathway flanked on the left, east, by quarrying, and a steep drop towards the Nash Brook on the right, west, as you're walking down the valley towards the sea. The middle section that we shall fondly in daylight, that is referred to as the shaded glade, which is basically this area. At night, however, it is unerringly frightening. This very section can be muddy in winter, and a canopy of branches and leaves protects you from the sun's rays and then raindrops in a storm. And finally, the windswept third section here, with the distinct sound of the sea and its salty aroma, it seems fairly more friendly on this stretch. After 30 or so guided walks on behalf of Ghost Experience Cymru, part of Archaeology Cymru, through the Blaenau, mainly in the dark, I feel that I am now experienced enough to sense a presence down there. And what have I sensed? But before we discuss the whys and wherefore all, take my advice. I would not recommend heading down there at dusk by oneself. Don't go down there without a torch. The whole story of the ghost at Blaenau is a long-winded background that I offer here. Reported to the national media in March 2014 with a monk's bones by here. So if we were monk's bones found by here, just along the coast, there you go, colouring it in. These monk's bones that belonged to a cemetery were a national sensation. The grave of this unfortunate monk was meant to be excavated by the Glamorgan Archaeological Trust, as claimed on a BBC News item. Well, over a year and a half later, they still had failed to do so, even though they had been paid the funding from the state to excavate the mortal remains. And in my own book, I put the corrupt world that is Welsh archaeology. The bones still in place and entirely on view against the dignity of the poor buried soul were to be part of the locations to visit for my very first historical and ghost experience Cymru walk. The day before that momentous Friday, they had been still in place. That is dem bones. And I don't put it in the book, but I was the archaeologist that actually reported this to the national media. The walk had taken place in relatively clement weather, although there had been the odd torrent of rain, just as we reached the coast. The first part of the walk was over. The historical stories now, as a light had failed, was the turn of the ghosts. As we reached the monk's bones, and with total horror, someone had maliciously smashed them out of the rock with stones, with the broken fragments laying on the beach below. This heinous act marked what was in store for us as we walked back, all the way from the coast, all the way back along here, all the way back along the road. We didn't actually go across the landscape, all the way back to the Plough and Harrow for a well-deserved drink. Right. Are you okay? Okay. Good. I thought we had some interruption then. So the ghost that evening and over several further evenings haunted the Monknash walks. We started to drop the history content and occupy on the ghostly sightings and feelings we had been described by others and lots of my own. Back to the very first walk, I made a small survey of what people had felt and seen, in particular along the Blaenau stretch. 2 individuals came forward with chillingly the same story, and neither of them was linked. The steward, a dear friend of mine, Tom Savory of Barry, that night recanted that he felt he had become followed by a presence along the shaded glade section of the Cwm towards the coast. Basically from about sort of here to going all the way to the coast. And then another true skeptic on the walk recited the very same story the steward had offered. For a time, what they had described seemed as if it was a real person. The entity followed them back out again. How could this be, I thought? They would have had to pass a real person for it to have turned up behind them. Therefore, the conclusion has to be that this was a ghostly entity attached to the group. But as the walk at Monknash took on a once-a-month occurrence, for the first couple of years the stories grew. It was usual women who told these stories. One remarked, "I could not bear to walk on the right-hand side of Blaen y Cwm after passing the mill towards the shaded valley." Then there were the telltale sounds of somebody walking on the opposite side of the Cwm, over towards on sort of this sort of side. That's what we're talking about. That's where people would hear and see things. And this was before the shaded glade. What is more critical about these spectral sounds is that more than one individual was convinced it was a shuffling and stomping around. Thoughts that it could be a 10-year-old boy came to the minds of many. Actually, within the shaded glade, well before it culminates before the footpath to head into the last section, third section towards the sea, I used to tell the story of the Gracha ribbon, a frightful hag that haunted the villages around the coast, eyeing up her next victim for Mr. Death. This location is where activity was at its most potent, with various shaped orbs and sounds crackling in the bushes all around. We took the time to write down some of these first-hand accounts taken over 4 years. And I'm just going to remind myself of something here. Here we go. As soon as the story of the Grach was being recanted in the Blaen y Cwm burial lane, there was like shuffled footsteps towards the side of the path. And then it was just as if somebody was walking about. I told Michelle, who was beside me, and then it just moved from the tree into the undergrowth or the side of me. And it was just like a weird noise. It was as if somebody was there and flashed the torch, and nobody was present. There was no reflection of animal eyes or nothing. There was nothing there, as one of my walkers said. It was almost as if the real story of the Gracha ribbon would conjure up mischief. Some stories would attract positive or negative energy. A further account states, saw red lights before you mentioned the witch. Monknash was the very walk in 2015 that I was a total skeptic in the belief of ghosts. As activity increased on this walk and the others, a year of such trails, and I was a true believer. And such was the belief in me by those attending the walks, I started a channel this occurrence based on this. We present this account. So before we do that, I'm going to change the image. So let's sort of clear that. Do you know, this is one of those types of walks that as I'm talking, I've got so many things in my head. And there we go. There we go. We need this image. How are you feeling at this stage, Amy?
Horrible. Absolutely horrible. I'm not going to lie.
Actually, to be honest with you, I've got hairs on the back of my neck. Here we go.
I'm feeling like, ooh, no, I don't like that picture at all.
No. Here we go, folks. As we entered the woods, the atmosphere changed. I felt there was something evil there. And that's why I said to Karl, don't go any further down the path. Whatever it was wanted to scare us and maybe hurt one of us. But between Karl and I, we held them back. And then there was this. I also felt the presence of a little girl, but I think she is connected to Karl. it started to become clear that I had some connection with these entities, whether they were innocuous or malign. And then there was one area of the Cwm that we have missed out of this story. The mill started to become more and more active with the once monthly visits. By the following year, we would run walks for different age groups. The path above the mill would have a different effect on children than it would for adults. Some children remarked the sentiments of one child was as follows. And you know what? I've got to. I'm writing something down. My head is so full. I do apologize. This is what one of the children said. At first, at the Blaenacwm Mill, I felt a small figure pass through me, and it sent a shiver down my spine. We would never go actually down the slope to the mill alongside the river. Health and safety implication made that impossible. But nevertheless, the flow of activity was powerful. One middle-aged woman reported, I felt something push me and almost fell over. The children in the woods were the overall theme of activity there. And it is with no wonder why children would be the overriding case for Blaenacwm, due to the proximity with the mill. Children have been known to play within the mill leats. Llandaff has such a story. And as sluices are released, the race would take children to the mill head, just behind the building there. That's where the mill head is. The children then shot out onto the overshot water wheel. Basically, water above the wheel would guide where the water wheel is and the treads, and when they turned onto the treads of the mill wheel, they would go around and around and around, and they would drown. They would drown. But there's a very important thing about this story that I'm going to tell you at the end. It's a very important thing, but I'll finish this chapter. On a final note, and I'm sure in a future book in this series we can discuss them more, the monks. Come to think of it, the monks here before the dissolution of the monasteries in the late 1530s can only be described as not being the best-spirited individuals. They were brigands of the highest caliber. The monks had actively wrecked ships. After all, it was their stretch of coast. And only they would have sanctioned the murder of those wrecked out at sea. The monks would drag token bodies along burial lane to keep up the pretense that they were godly and prepare the bodies for burial after sounding cynical the terrible loss of life at sea. These going off the book, these people would take these poor individuals to prepare them for burial within the bar of the Plough and Harrow. They would take token individuals there. And one important, I'm going completely off the book now, not a single person ever survived the wrecking along the coast from 1453 all the way to the Frolic disaster in 1831. These individuals had already been stripped of the worldly goods at the coastline by the same monks that were now performing their final rites. So these had murdered people, and then they performed their final rites. Hypocritical, women present, you know what I'd like to say. These Cistercian, I was going to say cynical monks, are to be seen to be of a total abhorrent nature, malign and evil to the worst degree. And for one, I agree with the dissolution of the monasteries under King Henry VIII. It's a good thing that happened. Do you know what, right? I'll be completely honest with you. I didn't believe in ghosts at all. And then I started telling stories about this woodland. And then the story about the children, I cannot believe that the information started to come to me, the references started to come to me, the feelings and the senses and the children, and to actually channel these entities is a very dangerous thing. And you know, I have when I've when I've been there and I've channeled these entities, I've got to cleanse myself after every event down there. And I've always avoided doing haunted evenings down there. But when I've done haunted evenings down there, terrible things have happened. Very, very terrible things have happened. Carrying on. Away from my book now. So we've taken groups of people down there, and there's one story of a Scotsman that we saw heading towards the coast, but not today. So this is one of the 30 groups of, we've done 30 odd walks down there, and you know, everybody's always aimed with torches and stuff, and they always stay with us to the end. And the interesting thing is that lots of lanes going from the road to Wick, all the way, the Wick Road itself, going all the way through to Monkton, Brufton, Monknash. There's a sense about them. The road leading all the way from Southern down to Monknash, there's a sense about them. Running from Marcross to Monknash, there's always a sense, there's this feeling of something out there. And one of the things was that when we did the first walk, the 3-hour walk, I told so many stories about the history. And to be honest with you, after a while, people were not interested in the history. They were just interested in the stories. They were interested in a particular story. And what is that story I want to tell you? Come on. Come on, your homework, Sean Kelwith. Yeah, you forgot it.
Sorry. I've got a lot of moths around me, and I'm like, oh.
And that stopped you telling me about Sean Kelwith?
You know, moths represent the souls of the dead, so it could be those coming to me.
And why not? Why not? I'll tell you the story of Sean Kelwith now. Do you know, folks, when you're doing research about these different things, it's a bad idea to research them on the internet. When we started the first Monknash walk, we were desperate. I tell you now, we were desperate. We couldn't find any ghost stories at all. And then we turned to Mary Trevilian's books, and she was a godsend. And then we typed something into the internet, and there was a story about Sean Kelwith. And then we found it in one of Mary Trevilian's books. And can I find that story on the internet anymore? I can't. That's the danger of the internet. It changes all the time. Things go up there and leave and so on. I think people update stuff. So always go with books when you research these things. That building there is a rather interesting building. That's the columbarium. That's the columbarium itself. And there's another building, the chapel building, which is, I've shown you the location of that. Well, I'll just sort of show you where that is again, to so you know where I am on the map. This here, the chapel building, the columbarium, so you know where we are. Yeah. So that's the chapel building. It's basically, there's another image, would look very similar to this. And it's the chapel building. And I thought that was really appropriate. It's not marked on the maps as a chapel, but it's a chapel, right? Archaeologists haven't researched this landscape, but it's a chapel. The style actually has some of the dressed stone from the chapel actually in it. As you go over it, you can see some of the dressed stone. It's great. Look at the styles. Always look at styles. Styles are always made from very well carved stone. Good bit of advice there. So Sean Kelwith. So I found this story about Sean Kelwith, and I read it, and I read it again, and there's a different version, and there's another version. And it became apparent to me that Sean Kelwith was the only ghost story that we could find associated with this landscape initially. And Sean Kelwith was a wise monk. He was a soothsayer. He was a monk with supernatural things about him. And the story has it that Sean Kelwith would walk across the landscape after his duties as a monk, and people would go up to him and ask, they would ask They would ask him to soothsay. They'd ask him to predict the future. They would ask him to tell them stories, and he was a very good soothsayer. Anyway, this brother came up to him one day and said, "Sean, which lies are you going to tell me today?" Now, if you said that to any soothsayer, right, you can imagine you're going to get a mouthful. But Sean Kelworth said, you really want me to tell you some lies? And the brother said, yeah. Sean Kelworth said to his fellow brother, you're going to die 3 times today. And the other brother just laughed. How are you going to die 3 times in a day? Sean Kelworth said, you will die 3 times today. John Kelworth just went off. And the brother went on with his doings, went on with his everyday life that moment. And he had a bit of a knapsack with him, this other brother. And he chuckled to himself. Sean Kelworth, nuts. I can't die 3 times in a day. He was out to collect eggs this one day. And there was a hawk's nest up in the tallest tree. And he looked at this hawk's nest and he thought, I want to collect some of those hawk's eggs. So it was a very long, narrow, slender tree, as you can imagine. You know, birds of prey would sort of have their nests and rests in very tall trees. You can imagine where I'm going with this. So the other brother climbed the tree. One branch, another branch, rest his legs. Another branch, he carried on up the tree, all the way to the top. So he couldn't reach into the nest on the highest branch. He couldn't reach into the nest, so he sort of struggled. And he got his arm, and he stretched his body, and he reached into the nest. He collected one egg, put it in his knapsack, and as he went in to collect another egg, he was bitten by a baby adder. Now, I'm told that a baby adder's is very potent. You know, very baby adders are potent because their glands are building up, and there's that potency. So if you get bitten by an adder, a baby adder, and you're not really well enough, and you've got some vulnerability about you, you've got health problems, it's going to kill you. So that would have killed him. So he thought, oh, I've been bitten, I need to get down from the tree. So he panicked and he started tumbling, hit one branch, hit another branch, and then his spine hit one of the branches. It paralyzed him. He broke his spine. So he's falling down the tree he must be thinking now, hang on, this is fatal now. He must be thinking, hang on a minute, Sean Kelworth is not going to get his last wish as he's dying now. We don't know, do we? So he falls down and he hits a puddle of water and he drowns. Anyway, the next day, the body's collected by no one less than Sean Kelworth. Sean Kelworth collects the body. And he notices the bite on his hand. He notices that the spine's been broken. He also notices that the poor brother has drowned. And Sean Kelworth probably said, I told you so. You will all know never to take the mickey out of a gypsy or a soothsayer. If you do, you're going to be cursed. And that is a very rich story. And you know what? I dare any of you to find that story on the internet. And if you do, you will either find the story I've just told or a slightly different story. It's also believed that the Valley of Cumbach is actually named after Kelworth, Sean Kelworth. And that's where his name is also enshrined, in that valley that we've just fondly talked about as well. Rather interesting, this building, the columbarium. A bit of history, a bit of archaeology. Columbariums, and Amy knows what I'm going to say now. Columbariums are buildings that would be used to keep doves, beautiful white doves. And doing my research on that first day, I was very much intrigued by this very large columbarium, a circular dovecote. Very intrigued by it. And you're looking in the dark there. And you'd go in there in the dark and you'd show all the roosting perches in there. Not one roosting perch. The 666 roosting perches in here. Which anyone wants to shout out, Catherine or Amy, that's the number of the beast. 666 roosting perches in there. And this is a sinister, cynical building. And the reason why it's sinister and cynical is because this is a building that comes into its own. And the reason why it comes into its own is that on harvest time, you could talk about late August, early September, back in the 1400s, the doves would be released. And the doves would be encouraged to go a little bit further north, over the Blue Lane, into secular land. And the doves, whilst the harvest is being gathered in by very, very poor people indeed, the doves would peck at the ground and they would collect the grain into their crops. And lo and behold, the vulgaris, the common people, would beat the ground to stop the doves collecting the grain. But nevertheless, the doves would fly into this columbarium with a full crop. I've forgotten to mention something, haven't I? Back in the 1400s, taxation, they would tax everything. You would be taxed on, you'd have to pay the 1/10 tithe to the church, right? If you had a monastic grange near your home, you'd have to pay another 1/10 tithe, okay? Which would all be stored in this massive tithe ban. And then you'd also have to pay a tithe to the Lord of the Manor, the manorial duties. So that's another, that's a third sack. You'd also have to pay another a tithe to the king. That's another sack, fourth sack. Then it was against the law to grind your own grain. So when you took your grains from the miller, right, you'd have to give him another tax in another sack. So that's a fifth sack. And the mill was either owned by the church or the Lord of the Manor. So where are we? We've got 5 sacks of grain left. 1 sack would have to be paid to the village reeve, because the village reeve would look after the village. So that's another sack gone. Usually you would be fined because your ridge and furrow is a bit long. You know, everyone had to pay fines back then. It's what happened in the medieval period. You may have to pay it to the church, you may pay it to the Lord of the Manor, right? So you've got 3 sacks of grain left. 1 sack of grain would be needed to plant the following year. 1 sack of grain would be needed to feed your family. And 1 sack of grain was all you had left to trade at the local market. But there's a catch. You've missed the other sack of grain that was collected by these doves. And what would happen is that with the big fat crops on the doves, somebody would go into this building at night. They would collect the doves. They would slice them open. They would allow the grain to dry. They would put it into a sack and they would sell it back to the poor people if you were without grain the following year. I absolutely hate monks. Evil, cynical, sadistic people. And I am so pleased that Henry VIII got rid of them all. That building behind there is the gable end of the tithe ban, right? The gable end, you can see how tall it is. It dominates the landscape. It's a huge building, and it goes all the way along here, all the way, and I do believe it's 70 meters long by about 20 meters wide. It's a big building. And this is the sense of the darkness of the landscape. What I'd like to maybe do is look out at that landscape, a little bit more history, archaeology. These fish ponds were really important. The fish ponds were from this side, from the east to the west hand side. Very large fish ponds. This is what the this is what the monks ate. You know, they had their trout, maybe a few big pike there, a few bream, and so on and so on. They would be in these huge fish ponds. And something that I need to chuck in there before I forget it is that whenever anyone disagrees with me on this point, disagree with me at the end. You can, but you're going to be talked down. This monastery, you can call it a monastery. Other people will call it a monastic grange. It had a church. It had great buildings. So I call it a monastic grange stroke monastery landscape here. It's a very large area. And 200 acres around were directly held by these people. But you can't make that money out of selling grain and cattle and sheep. The tithe ban represented their wealth, and also represented the wealth by the wealth collected from the wrecking duties. And we'll just leave it there. The wrecking duties made the wealth of this landscape, not the grain, not the cattle, not the tithe. The amount of money was made from barrels of butter, barrels of cheese, you know, all the liquor and everything collected. Very evil people. So this is one of the groups that would usually here, very large group, and they were absolutely usually exhausted by the time they got to the bottom here. By the time they got all the way to the bottom, and we're really starting to understand the landscape. And again, looking down here, Amy. Now, I would like to mention one of a few of our haunted evenings, and one of such haunted evening that we had down here. We had radios. We had CB radios. And one of my stewards was sitting up by Blaenacwm by himself, and around 12 o'clock we heard nothing. We had our CB radios on, we heard nothing, right? And the strangest thing was that after 12 o'clock the CB radios started to go nuts, and my steward, that was all alone looking over the mill, was screaming down the radio, "Can you please come up here now? There's groups of children around me. I can hear strange music. Please come up here." He was begging for us all to go up to him, right? And we all turned up, and he said, "I was surrounded by children. I was surrounded by music and all the rest of it." And to be honest with you, something else happened that evening. And I will tell you what happened that evening. We did a bit of Ouija in this locality with the radios, and we actually spelled out the name of somebody. Carrying on. A little bit more history in the archaeology. If you ever go down to this mill, if you ever go down to the woods today, you'll have a great surprise. Now, the water itself here this is where the sluices were. This is where the leat led on. Basically, those that don't know what a leat is, what you'd have the river, the Nash Brook, and what would happen is that in the winter months, there would be a channel that led off from the river, and then that would lead to a great pond. So in the summer months, when there was less water, you would need to keep the mill wheel going all the time. You'd need to keep it going all the time. And therefore, as less water was available into the mill wheel, you would then lift up the sluices, and then water from the pond would then be fed in above into the overshot wheel and would make the mechanism go round. And the problem is, whenever this happened, nobody would warn the children playing in the pond in the summer months. And then that's where they would get trapped into the race. And then that's why the activities of them drowning would actually take place. Now, there's a couple of things, a bit more history and archaeology. When we were researching this, it was classed as ruinous on an admiralty chart in about, I think it was about 1831. It was seen as being ruinous in about 1831. It was some say you could possibly have a grain mill here, or you would have a woodcutter's mill. It probably did both, actually. And that's really important. When you've got a mill, when you've got the cogs going, you've got to regulate those cogs. You've got to regulate the wheel itself. So the sluices would go up and down when you needed water. Water would be allowed from the main stream, or you could call it a river in the winter months, and that would be regulated because you don't want the wheel going too fast and you don't want it going too slow. Looking at the plough and harrow. Now, I did actually promise you some stories about the plough and harrow, and I'm probably going to tell you maybe one, and then we're going to then actually we're getting not too long, and we've got to call it a day actually. But I'll keep showing you a few more images. Tell you one story. We know that this building was constructed by about 1350. We know this was a monastic building. And the tithe barn was over towards the left, actually. And next time we'll look at the porch and the interesting stonework that you can actually see at the porch, and we'll look a little bit more about the tithe barn in the future as well. And there's actually Paula, the old landlady, and she left under strange circumstances, but I'm not going to go into that. But this bit of the building here, probably extended over to here, is actually part of one of the monastic buildings. And over by here, it's said that when darts are being played, that area where you play darts is where the mortuary table was. That's where bodies would be prepared and treated for burial at St. Mary's Church itself. And if any of you ever actually goes into the pub when it's open again, as you stand at the bar, if you look directly down at the floor on the left, there's an old reused gravestone. No word of a lie, there's a gravestone. You can see a bit of lettering in it. Very strange, that stone. So moving on again. So do you know what? As we've just looked at the plough and harrow, over by here are the toilets. So a few little stories that we've jotted down. This is about the plough and harrow. I did experience a few things. The first was when I went into the ladies' toilets in the pub. That's not me, by the way. I felt like it was like I was being suffocated and couldn't breathe. Then, when we went into the building, on the walk, the dovecot that I've showed you, I was being pulled back by something. She was being pulled back into the dovecote. There was no one behind me. I also felt like I was sinking, so I had to get out of there. My friend stood in the same spot as me. When I left, and something pulled her back into the dovecot as well. As we entered the woods, the atmosphere changed. I felt there was something evil there. And that's why I said to Karl, don't go any further down that path. Whatever it was, wanted to scare us. and maybe hurt one of us. But between Karl and I, we held them back. I also felt the presence of a little girl, but I think she is connected to Karl. I know we've already read those two paragraphs, those two little sentences, but this sense that I am connected to children in that wood, that's been mentioned to me a few times. And I know John doesn't believe in orbs, and he feels that this is mumbo jumbo. When we get the mic on, I would like his impression on some of the things we've said, actually. But when I'm talking a particular story about the Gracker ribbon, always we see orbs. Always people seem as if they're touching us. There's always something going on there. So maybe what I'd like to do is end on a little bit more history, a little bit more archaeology, and then we'll call it a night. Because I want to give it a little bit of time if anyone's got any questions. So a little bit more history. Again, more about the Plough and Harrow in the future, and a little bit more about the Grange of Monknash. This little triangle that we started off with, strangely enough, what would happen is that at the time of the plague, various plagues and outbreaks, the cholera in the late 1840s, 1850s, the time of the plague in 1349, and the various times that the plague comes back again in 1665, 1666, and so on. There's constant plagues coming back every few years. What would happen is that if it's a mild bout of plague, people would be buried in the church graveyard, say at St. Mary's, or any church graveyard. But if there's a large number of burials, if a large number of people are being buried, they're usually placed in rows. I know you've seen it on the media about people being buried in New York at this minute due to the pandemic, but they'd be buried in rows. And if suddenly there's a spike in deaths, people are all just tossed into a pit, rich, poor, and so on. And we know that in this area, the reason why nobody's ever built on this triangle is they're buried underneath this spot. Again, this various interestingly dark wooded landscape, again back in the Cwm. And this is probably a nice image to end with again. And I think one of the tragedies about doing walks like this is that you either get the right people or you get the wrong people. If you get a wrong crowd that's just expecting history and archaeology, it can distract from when you're telling the history stories. And likewise, when you get people wanting the ghosts and the haunted stories, you get people saying, oh, you know, we want the haunted stories. We're not really here for the history and the archaeology. And one thing I will tell you next time is Peter. Peter, the ghost that haunts this landscape. And you won't find that anywhere on the internet. It's always best to go and visit this landscape in the daylight. And actually, there's a stile here. And you can wander across this landscape, past this building here, going past the chapel. Not to encourage you to trespass, but if you run all the way over to the columbarium, take a photograph, look at this building that we'll look at next time, the tithe barn, run all the way back to the footpath, and then you head across the field, and you've actually got to go all the way back to the main road, because this part of the footpath is now closed. It's not really maintained, but rather interesting things to be said. So what I'm going to say now, we're going to call it a night. But I want to ask if there's any questions.
Yeah,
and we're going to unmute Amy before we unmute everybody. Catherine and Amy, is there anything you two want to say before we unmute everybody?
I just say that it was really interesting. My father farmed all that land, and my mother, as a child, planted all the trees on the triangle. So I think she'd be really interested to hear all about that.
They still own that farm? They don't, do they?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Oh, Catherine, I'd love to have a. I'll send you an email. Actually, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. So I'll send you an email because I got your email address. If that's okay.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. Yeah.
And Amy, tell us how you felt about that lecture. Rather, just a minute or so. Give it to us.
It was just that part with the children. It's always the spirits of the children that kind of draw me in, like you yourself. But I've had, I know it might just be a coincidence, but it's never happened. I've had tons of moths around me tonight, which it could be spiritual, you know, it could just be pure coincidence. But if you don't know, I collect dolls, and they've actually been going over to my dolls.
They might want to live in them.
Yeah, maybe. But Carl,
yeah,
can you
yeah. Not to dismiss anything you've just said. Go on, Carl.
Yeah. Can you go back to one of the images, please, Carl? Of the mill?
I will do that for you, Amy. Only you, mind. Right. So which one? Right. Go.
Hang on. Back. This one, right. No, go back. Next one after that. Go back. Oh, no, go forward again. Go forward.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Forward. This one, yeah. Oh, back.
Okay. I think what's happening is that you're getting it a different time than me. Is that okay?
That's it. The one in the middle there. Right, look in the water, and it looks like you can actually see the reflection of a child.
Over by here?
Right in the corner there. Yeah.
There, yeah. Well, I'm not sure it is because Michelle took this. So, wow, interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. So I'm going to one second, folks. I'm just wary of something with tonight. So I've just got right. Okay, I got a power problem. A second, if you want to bear with me. Right. Okay. Hang on, I've got a problem with my power lead. A minute. Hang on. Right, we'll stop sharing there. Right, anything? Anybody want to ask anything? I'll get all your mics on. Unmute all.
Carl?
Yes.
The monastery or the monks in Monknash, are they anything to do with the church in Llantwit?
No, it's a different order altogether. It's a different order. The ones in Llantwit are to do with Shrewsbury, and the ones at Monknash and Marcross are equally to do with Margam and Neath.
Okay.
Anyone got anything else they want to say?
Yes, me.
John, I want you to be positive tonight, but I want you to ask my questions directly. But before we ask you, John, anyone else got anything to say?
Well, I was going to ask monks at Courteville in Penarth, Lower Penarth.
Courteville, yeah.
There was a manor there. Just that's really come to my mind through the evening because that's where I actually grew up.
Courteville Manor, Courteville House. We did an article on it in the newsletter years ago, but yeah,
okay.
That's rather interesting. Yeah, it's difficult to track down the monks for that landscape, but there would have been a lot of them. So yeah.
But yeah, when you're talking about the evil monks, yes, I can talk to you about it again, perhaps. But
yeah, no, thank you.
Yes.
For that. Thank you. Anyone else got anything else to say before I have a quick chat with John?
Yes.
Okay, nobody's got anything else to say. John, I've mentioned you a few times, so you've got every right to come back at me, but try and keep it positive. Go for it.
Right, I've been very positive in that I think we need to look up what Columbarium is.
A columbarium. It's a typical circular dovecote, but you can have a square dovecote as well.
No, you look it up. It's nothing to do with doves. My Latin speaking wife looked it up because I asked her to do so.
Yeah, go on.
And it's absolutely nothing to do with doves.
But very interesting because if you do look it up, you'll actually find columbarium. Everyone look it up, and we'll actually come back at that next week, John. Go on, carry on.
Right. The other thing is, yes, Orestes pieces. I wanted to know a date. jotted it down as 1349, and later on you agreed with that.
Okay.
The other thing is, I'm not so sure as a wildlife type person, adders climb trees.
Ah, no, they were put in there by the mother.
Oh, all right then. Yeah. Yeah, and I've got the date of 1665, 1666 for the plague. Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think that's something I need. But the columbarium, Carl, you'll need to investigate further because it's not what you perceive it to be.
Actually, I think it's my pronunciation, because if you look it up, I'm doing this now. Actually, I've got it. Columbarium, dovecote. I've actually got it on here in front of me.
Right, well, put it as an N on the end.
Right. Okay, so it's my pronunciation. So there we
Yes.
go. I've got that there. Bingo. There it is. You can see that on the screen. Yeah. And it can also refer to morsalia as well, a circular morsalia, John. Exactly.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
to be honest with you, that is a really good contribution. So you've got a word that's got two meanings. Really good. Thank you for that, John. No, that's appreciated. I've learned something else myself. So
Yeah.
any other questions before we go, folks?
Well, let me just have a think. I think I've
Good.
just about covered
Good.
everything. The other thing that's
last word from you, John. Go on.
Right, is this thing on ghosts and ghoulies.
Give it to us.
Right. Now, as a spiritualist of many outstanding years, I have to point out that these ghosts and ghoulies, yes, they do exist, but we've got to look at why they do. And the reason that they do is that they do not realize that they are dead and they need pointing to the light. When somebody dies, they don't always know where they are or where they're going. And that is why some of them get mischievous and do the wrong sort of things, like switching lights off because they think they're comedians. And that's really what it's all about. And frightening people is another thing they delight in doing. But they need pointing in the direction of the light. And unfortunately, in this day and age, there are very, very few mediums that want to do this. And indeed, I ran a website for many, many years, and I had a plethora of people wanting me to direct them to people that are mediums that could sort this sort of thing out. Okay. And sadly, there are very, very few mediums in the SNU and other organizations throughout the world that have the ability to do it.
And John, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you for that. And we can obviously get more of that next week. I do believe Goff wants to say something. Go on, Goff, quickly.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed that lecture. It was wonderful. Very interesting.
Well, I tell you what.
Very, very spiritual. I have to agree with you.
Has everybody enjoyed tonight? They can give me a thumbs up and a clap if they want using the icon. Thank you very much. That's good. I like it. Okay, thank you very much. So next week we're going to be doing Lantrisson. I'm looking forward to Lantrisson because I used to live there a little bit actually. So next week there's going to be a lot of archaeology and history. Like we've actually done a little bit of archaeology and history tonight, so that's good. And if there's any places that you want me to cover, stay behind at the end and have a chat with me. For those that need to go, in a moment you can go. Anyone who wants to have a quick chat at the end. I will see everybody else in the week, and I'll keep everybody up to date with things. So anyone who wants to stay now can. Other than that, I'm going to say goodbye to those that need to go. Goff, Karen, Ellie, Sue, Catherine, thanks for joining us. Amy, Johanna, Pam, Rosamund, Del, John, and I'm going to be here if anyone wants to chat. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I've enjoyed it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Night, night, everyone.
Night. Thank you. And keep safe.
Right. And you, definitely.
Oh, and Pam, next week I want your sexy voice.
Okay. I'll do my best. Okay. Bye then.
Night.
Night. No star.
No star. Who wants a little chat about something before I go? Because I've got to go in a sec. But
well, wouldn't mind coming back to that Courterville Road.
Is that Courterachta? Oh, no, you've got Courterville.
No, enough. I grew up there actually, Carl, and I had a few sort of strange experiences as a child. But I won't go into that now. But I'd be interested to have the information that you've sort of gathered, because I didn't realise that there was like a monastery there. I know that's not at Monknash, but in my mind tonight, I was sort of tying it in with that area as well. With you talking about the evil monks and things like that.
I can hear a ghost story for my book that you'll be writing. Well, get on with it.
Yeah, I have got one. So that's. I'd be interested in whatever if you've got one of those old newsletters with the history of the place.
We have, and I got to be honest with you, this background is great tonight, isn't it? The leaves are really good.
Really cool.
I like that. I've fallen into
the dark. I want a background.
John, you can have a background. All you've got to do is go onto your. There's a thing at the bottom. It says next door to your video. There's an arrow. It says video settings and choose virtual background. You can choose whatever you like.
Well, I haven't got that seemingly.
And John, Rosamond, and Amy for next week, right? For next week, and in the week, can we mess around with this thing that says chat? It says here. It says hi, right? And your thing should flash now on your screen. If you click on that, you can write something. Go on, write something.
Oh,
what have I got to click on, Carl?
The thing that's flashing, the yellow button that's flashing.
I haven't got anything flashing.
Is it say chat on there?
Chat to?
Yeah, go on. That's right. You click on it. Go on, John. I want you to give it a go as well. Come on.
No, I haven't. That's a clip. No. Well.
And Amy, next week, John, if you're joining us next week, and Amy, right? If you want a bit of a chat, whilst I'm talking, you can. You two can chat with each other, and this is what we're going to do next week.
Okay.
So if John says, "Oh, he's talking shit," right? I don't mind. You can do it on the right there. Amy, you can respond, and that'll be your job next week, Amy. Anyone who puts anything, John's writing, brilliant. And Rosamond, right? Anything anyone else wants to say before I go?
Well, just that I was there in summer solstice 2015 by the plough with my friend who subsequently died, actually. But yeah, so that was interesting because I'd walked that area then, and also to Nash Point. Is that near there too?
What?
The lighthouse.
No, that's the other valley. That's Marcross.
Okay. I've been getting. Yes, I've been to the plough house.
This is Cumnash. This is Cumnash. The other one's Nash Point.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah. Done a couple of walks there. Yes. Good. That's all. Thanks, Carl. Very interesting. Thought-provoking evening.
My pleasure. There was, I think there was 12 or 13 of us tonight. I can't remember.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I think there may be 13.
11.
All right.
12 with you. I've written down, but.
Right. Okay. I think there was 12. Okay. So if anyone's got, and John, I will see you Tuesday. And Amy, I'll have a quick chat with you now. And Rosamond, are you off as well?
I'm off now. Thank you very much, Carl. Great evening once again.
My pleasure.
Bye, Amy. Bye, John. Bye, Carl.
Bye, Rosamond. Bye.
Try and work out how I can leave now.
Good.
No, it might take a while. Right.
Bottom right, Rosamond.
Right, good. See you again, Rosamond. Right, John, I'm going to have to dash in a second. Anything you want to say before you go?
Oh, I'm going to have my carafe ready on Tuesday for pizza.
Oh, please. That really. Do you know what? If you can get me one of those red things, what do you call them? A cafe, the red thing.
The underpants that he wears.
Oh, the red thing that Turkish people used to wear.
Fez.
Oh, Fez, aye.
John,
My God, I've got to get one. Yeah,
John,
I'll look on the internet.
Get 2 of them. Get 2 Fezes and get one to me in the post.
Aye. Yeah, that'll get him going, won't it? Yeah.
I tell you what, if you get me a Fez, right, then we'll have a chat and I'll get you something, right?
All right, then.
All right, John.
I'm still struggling with that bloody magpie. The other magpies keep having a go at him. He's still breathing.
Michelle and I would pick him up.
I'd love to do something with him, but
try and get him in. You need to get him in a cage and feed him and get him strong because he cannot fly without those feathers. All right.
Well, he is, but only just. Yeah.
I know that's not good enough, John. As I say, if you do need our help, Michelle will collect him.
Right. Well, he's catching him. If Michelle can catch him, that would be a step in the right bloody direction.
Well, Michelle caught me, so that's a good thing.
Well, we'll ask her if she wants to catch a bloody magpie in Newport because I bloody can't. I've tried.
You know, I'm holding up something on my shoulder and you can't see it. It's weird, isn't it? Right, okay, John, I'll see you Tuesday.
Happy Easter.
Night, John. Night.
Good night.
Night. Good night. Right, just quickly, Amy. So, yeah, try and get Sophie on board, right?
Yeah, I will.
And I need you to do some recruiting because it looks like my computer's just about to go as well. So hang on. Right. Hang on. Exit full view. Right. So. Okay. Yeah, I'm really gonna have to go because my computer's. Hang on.
Okay. No problem.
Right. Okay. That's fine. Hang on. Right. Okay. Right. Try it because this might be going on for many months. See if you can start recruiting a few people off Facebook to join.
Yeah, no problem. I can do that.
Okay.
Carl,
anything you want to ask me quickly before you go? Because I'm gonna have to go.
I just want to say, stop making John say things because he talks a lot of shit.
I wanted it. He was a bit more sensible tonight, so that's fine. But we not. Yeah, exactly. All right then. Anyway, Amy, I'm gonna dash. So I'll see you soon. If you've got anything else you want to say.
No, all good tonight. Just really horrible feelings, but yeah.
Okay, that's good. All right then. Take care, Amy. Bye.
See you next week. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. 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 Bye.